few housekeeping items before we get started. So you can ask questions in the chat. We'll be answering them throughout and also at the end. And also in the chat, we're going to be sharing relevant links for you during the presentation. So look out for those. And when this is all done, you will receive a copy of this presentation in your email. So if you have to leave early or want to go back over things, you will be getting a link to the presentation later. And if there's any questions that you don't want to ask in this kind of more public forum, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Rashidah after this webinar or tomorrow, and we're happy to discuss things more privately. So I think we were going to wait for maybe a couple more minutes to see if anybody else is joining. But while we wait, I would love to remind everyone to submit to be featured in our women-owned business blog series. So here at Realty Collective, we have a blog series where we feature local women and female identifying people who own businesses and are doing great things here in Brooklyn. So if you or someone you know runs a business that meets that description, please send us a link to it and we will hopefully feature it in our blog and promote their business on our various channels. So do you think we should wait any longer or should we just jump in?
Take the jump.
Okay, we'll make the jump. Okay. Hi, my name is Tina Fallon, and I am a real estate agent with Realty Collective, which is a boutique real estate firm that's been around for almost 19 years, and I have been there for 18 of them. Our founder, Victoria Alexander, started the company in order to defy the stereotypes associated with real estate in New York City. So we are basically your coach, your therapist, your sounding board, and we help you get through the emotional roller coaster of selling in New York City. And we try to make it as easy and stress-free as possible. Obviously, it's never going to be stress-free, but we try to make it as pleasant an experience as we possibly can. One way we do that is by introducing you to folks like Rashidah Siddiqui. Rashidah.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rashidah Siddiqui. I am a real estate attorney. I have been practicing for 20 plus years now and primarily represent lots of first-time sellers or multiple sellers. I represent clients in all of the boroughs, including Nassau County, Suffolk County, also Westchester. I'm basically here to give you, as a seller, things you should start preparing yourself as you think about putting your property on the market, legally, what you should start saving, thinking about, and giving you that information. My main office is located downtown Brooklyn, but as I said, we represent clients all over New York.
So you're obviously here because you're considering selling. So one of the things we want to go over with you, because we do these monthly, and our guidance changes actually from month to month based on why a person might be selling right now. So if you are interested in selling at the moment, there's a lot of reasons to be selling. It has not been a great market for sellers, as you may have heard. Really, transactions are down year over year, and because of the high interest rate environment, we're seeing buyers are much slower to move forward even when they are in the market, and a lot of buyers are sitting out the market waiting for interest rates to come down. That has been projected to come down later this year. At the most recent Fed meeting, it seems like they're not going to reduce interest rates in March. So we were hoping, I was hoping that those rates might start to come down in March. It looks like it's going to be a little bit later in the year. So the interest rates that you're seeing right now are probably the interest rates that your buyers are going to be stuck with. And those are, 6 and above for buyers. So that's a reason why we've had a really slow market for you, for your real estate teams. We're just not moving things. And in fact, we're also finding that things take longer to get into contract, which is something that Rashidah was just talking about. But it is New York City, and the market is still hot for certain kinds of properties. So if you have what people are looking for, or if you have what everyone is looking for, which is a renovated townhouse that is completely ready to go and has parking in Park Slope, you're always going to find a market for that. But if you have something that's maybe a little bit harder to sell, something that is, maybe not in a renovated condition, something where there are some issues with the property, we can always help you find a buyer for that. There's a buyer for every kind of property as long as it's priced properly, and that's our job, is to help you find them. So the other good news is that inventory has been low, and so even though real estate sales have slowed significantly, prices have not come down substantially because the inventory is so tight that we are still just like not seeing, we're not seeing a lot of properties on the market. And as a result, there's still a lot of buyers out there and a lot of demand. And so that's keeping prices like reasonably high. So that's good news for you. And then we're also coming into the spring market. So as soon as the weather gets a little bit warmer, people can't help themselves. They want to go to open houses. So every year, no matter what kind of a market we're in, the spring is when we start to see buyers come back into the market. So especially if you have outdoor space or elements of your home that show especially well when there are leaves on the trees, which is most any property, it's a good time to sell right now. As long as you're aware of what the kind of friction is in the market, it's still a good time for you to be selling. So, and then the other reason to sell, I mean, even though properties are not necessarily selling at the highest rates, is if you're moving from New York City. And that makes us very sad. We think everybody should stay in New York if you can. But we do understand that if you're moving out, you're moving into a different market where your money's going to go further, then the fact that you sell for maybe a little bit less than you would have in 2022 is still going to give you the money and the buying power that you need to go into another market. So we're very respectful of that as well. We really understand, and we are with you for the whole transition from where you are now to where you need to be next. So if you are, if we haven't talked you out of selling, then you're still in the market, well, here are the things that we'd like you to take into consideration. So the market has been in a complete state of flux. It's one of the reasons we do this every month, is because every month we're seeing something different in the market. And even though the interest rates have gone up recently, they are down off of peak. And so we are seeing people, and definitely we're seeing banks being more willing to lend. There was a real tightening a little bit earlier, like last year, and we're starting to see that kind of loosen up again, which is really nice. And the other thing that we're seeing is that rents have soared post-pandemic. So if people are staying in New York, they're already paying kind of outrageous amounts of money monthly, and so they might as well buy. And there is real belief, and I think founded belief, that real estate in New York, if you can hold it for 5 years, is a sensible investment for most people if they can afford it. And so we definitely think it's a decent time to be selling, and it's always a good time to be a buyer in New York. So, but a big question that we have again is, have you owned your home long enough? So if you are, if you're selling something that you purchased, say in 2021, and your interest rate is 3%, and you're trying simply to move up to a larger apartment, you may be finding the math doesn't work. If you have bought your home in 2017, or if you bought your home 5 years ago, usually we start to see that the break-even horizon, so where you can get out and get all your money back out, including your opportunity costs, that starts to hit right around 5 years. But if you're sitting on a really great interest rate, it may not be a great time for you to sell. And we can talk through what those other options are, how you can get your equity out if you need to, or how you can rent your home. But we can help you calculate the appreciation, like what your home is worth over what you versus what you paid for it. But it's not just the appreciation that matters. There's closing costs involved when you buy and when you sell. And that's where New York City is going to get you. Rashida's going to explain.
Yeah, I definitely say that unfortunately in New York they get you when you're buying and they get you when they are selling when you're selling the property. So as a seller, you definitely want to calculate what type of costs you're going to have. New York City and New York State, there are transfer taxes. So if the transfer taxes for New York City depends on the purchase price. If it's under 500,000, it's 1%. And if it's over 500,000, it's 1.425%. And then for New York State overall, it's 0.4%. So on average, you're looking at minimum 1.825, nearly 2% is just transfer taxes that you have to pay to New York City and New York State. If you're selling a property that's in Suffolk County or in Nassau County or in Westchester, there's no New York City transfer taxes. It's just the state transfer taxes. But if you're in the boroughs, then you're looking at both New York City and New York State transfer taxes. So that's one of your main items. Is that roughly, let's say 1.825%, so 2% of your closing costs right there in transfer taxes. Then if you are selling a co-op, you're going to have co-op fees. Some co-ops have flip taxes. So it's always important to speak with your management company to find out what the flip tax is. Flip tax can be based on the selling price. Some buildings say it's 1% of your selling price. Other buildings may say it's, a percentage of your profit. So they'll look at what you originally purchased the property at, what you're selling it, and then potentially sometimes they allow you to put some of your closing costs in there. Or they may just say straight what you purchased it, selling it, the profit, that's a percentage. And then you'll start seeing a few of the older co-ops that had it based on the number of shares that you own. Those are typically the best because it's not a huge portion of your chunk that the co-op is going to be getting, but it's still something that you need to be aware of. And then there's buildings that don't have flip taxes at all. So if you have a co-op, you're looking to sell your co-op, you want to find out if your building has a flip tax. If you have a condominium, condos don't typically have flip taxes, but they may have what we call as an option fee. You don't see that as much, but you occasionally you'll see a condominium with that, and you want to also find out from your management company if there's an option fee, and that's something typically not a percentage but a flat fee. Um, and then there's your miscellaneous fees from the co-op or the condo. They may have transfer agent fee, move out deposits, things like that that you have to put into your calculation. If you have a mortgage on the property, then you have to calculate for the paying off your mortgage. You have your realtor commission, and then you have your attorney fees. So your main items would be transfer taxes, flip taxes of a co-op, paying off your mortgage, your realtor commission, attorney fee, and other miscellaneous. Sure, your real estate taxes are paid if it's a house, any open water, recording your mortgage, so other kind of smaller fees that may come in there. So you also want to also take in fact, if you've had this property for quite some time, there may be capital gains. So always want to speak with an accountant. If it was your primary residence, you do have an exemption if you've lived in the property for 2 out of the last 5 years. There's a 250,000 exemption for individuals. If it's a married couple, you have a 500,000 exemption. And then anything above that will be subject to capital gains. So always want to take into consideration, especially if you had it for quite some years, and there's a significant amount that you're selling for. And if you have investment property, maybe it's a two-family and you were renting out one portion and you're living in another portion, or maybe it was just an investment property that you had a condominium that you bought and you were resell and you were subleasing it. You want to think about, capital gains. How can that be deferred so you don't have to, pay Uncle Sam at this time, and you can use that to potentially buy another property. And that's what we call as a 1031 exchange. So you probably want to have a more deeper conversation with your attorney, with your accountant, if you have investment property that you're looking to sell, because you want to try to hopefully defer some of that capital gains because you don't have exemptions for that. So as you start thinking about selling, You have to think about which government agencies are coming for their hands out to get some of your profit. And then it's just some of your closing costs is things that you have to take into consideration. And the more you know about them up front, you can plan accordingly.
Right. I think keeping all of that in mind with a sort of clear head as you go through it is one of the ways we can help our clients be less disappointed when they sell. We want when you get that huge check at your closing, we want it to actually match up with your expectations. So really talking that through with your attorney beforehand. Also, one other thing I want to say is that 1031 is its own. We can have a whole seminar about that one, but you do want to talk to your real estate agent too about 1031s, because before you sell, you really want to have what you're going to buy lined up. So, because there can be some timing considerations there. So, definitely be clear with your whole team if you're considering a 1031 tax exchange. All right. So you're still here. So you're still thinking that you want to sell. So, the next thing I think is to take a look at whether your property is what people are looking for. So, do you have the kinds of amenities that people are looking for? Do you have outdoor space? There's certain things that post-pandemic have become really important for people. So starting in 2020, we saw people who were really looking for home office space. That was something that really matters to them. They want a door that they can close so that they can take Zoom calls when they're working from home. People who really want outdoor space. Do you have are you in a pet-friendly building? Is it a turnkey property? So one of the things that as inflation has been rising and your property value has been rising along with it, so has the cost of renovation and labor. And so we have found that if you have a home that is a fixer-upper, it's a much smaller buyer pool for that property because they have been told by their friends, they've been told by the media that renovation is too expensive for them. There are some buyers for whom a renovation really makes sense, and it's a great way for people to save money now. But if you have a home that needs renovation, there are fewer and fewer people right now who want to do work, especially at the kind of prices that properties are going for. So that's something to be mindful of. If you have a fixer-upper, however, that's priced well, there's going to be a great buyer pool for it. But if you have something that is really just dated and needs to be renovated, you may need to price it almost as if it's a fixer-upper, in order to attract buyers who aren't afraid of a little renovation. But if you do have a house that needs a lot of work, there is still a buyer for it. If you're in a great school district, which we're not allowed to really discuss with our clients, but is certainly one of the things that drives people to certain neighborhoods. If you're in a neighborhood where people are really interested in being in that school district, sometimes that can overcome some deficiencies in your building. And then if you're a multifamily versus a single family home, you're just going to attract different buyers. Some people, because of the costs of carrying mortgages now, are really looking for that additional income from a rental unit in order to offset their monthly payments. Some people don't want the hassle of having a tenant, and so they're just looking for a single family home. It's just really a matter of knowing who the buyer is for your home. And then if you have parking, ding, 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 that's something that everybody's always looking for. If you have parking and you have the capacity for charging an electric vehicle, even if it's just off the 110 power from your building, that is something that people are also really interested in right now in this period of time when you see a lot of people with plug-in vehicles and nowhere to plug them in. So those are just some considerations that people are looking at when they're considering properties. And throughout it, just recognize that you only need one buyer. This is not Shark Tank. You don't need a scalable model. There's just one person who can buy your home. And so as long as we help you find that one person, then you don't have to really worry about the rest of the market. But I think the next piece is really where we differ from the way other people approach this process. There's not a cookie cutter process for selling a home. And so we like to start with what's your plan for after you sell? And Rashidah will talk more about this too. But we want to know where you're going, what your plan is, where you want to land when this is all done. So what's your bottom line price-wise after you back out all of your closing costs? Where are you going, and what's your timeline? These are things that we really want to take into consideration before we market and list your home. So we don't want to sell your home in the first week and be really successful at selling your home, and then you have nowhere to go and you feel like you've been backed into a corner by this process. So even though we might be really successful at selling, we're not good at our jobs unless we know how to get you to your next home. So that's I think the most important piece. And if you can be flexible about it, then um, then you have more options in terms of what kinds of offers you can entertain on your home. But if you can't be flexible, so for example, if you know for sure that you have to close on the home that you're already in contract on in Colorado, and so you need to get the cash out of this before you can buy that, that's going to set your timeline differently from if you're very open-ended, you're going to be moving into a rental, you're downsizing out of this place and you're very flexible, then you're going to be able to entertain a lot of different kinds of offers. It's a big part of the puzzle, and this is a huge consideration in terms of how we position your home. And one of the things that you need to take into consideration, and I'll hand over to Rashidah, is how long does it take to sell your home?
So, New York is one of those states where we call what we have as an on or about closing time period. So, typically, if you're looking to sell your house, you're looking at an on or about 60-day closing. And that time period actually begins to run once you get into contract. So, it's not when you put the property on the market, it's even not when you're negotiating, it's actually when you are actually fully signed contract. So, on or about 60 days. If you have and that's also for a condominium typically. If you have a co-op, you're probably looking at a longer time period of roughly about 90 days, sometimes longer, because that buyer has to get approved by the co-op. And that could easily take another, month just to get them interviewed, application in, and seen and approved by the co-op. So even though we say on or about 60 days or on or about 90 days, that time does go pretty quickly when you're in contract. So you want to know and you have to be out of your property on the day before the closing, because they have to do a walkthrough. So typically 24 to 48 hours before the closing, the buyer does a walkthrough. So that means you have vacated the property so that they can do that final walkthrough. So it's at that timeline of on or about 30 days, sorry, on or about 60 days or on or about 90 days. You want to have a discussion with your attorney on what that looks like, and also with your realtor, because if you need to stay longer, or if you're buying and selling at the same time, there may need to be additional provisions that have to be negotiated and put into the contract. Typically, they're called post possession, or there may be contingencies. Before, I used to very rarely see a sale contingency in a contract. Now I'm seeing them a little bit more, as most as the buyers are being a little bit more flexible and sellers are also being a bit more flexible. So if you're buying and selling at the same time, you want to have a discussion with your agent on what does that look like, what does the time period, if there's contingencies in the contract, and of course have a discussion with your attorney to make sure that your contract has certain terms in there. But yeah, your time period is typically on or about 60 days or on or about 90 days. So that's 2 to 3 months that you have to get out of your property once you find that buyer.
And if you need more time than that, obviously we can build that time into the contract. So, but it's such a sort of race to get your place onto the market. And sometimes when you get that signed contract and you feel like, whew, I can take a break. And you can, for a couple of days, you can take a break. But then the wheel does keep turning, and we have to make sure that you've got plans for actually moving out of the house. So, so you have gone through this whole process, you're still with us, and you've decided to sell. And after you've gone through this process asks these questions, it is time to assemble your team. So for your sale, it is key that you have a real estate attorney and a real estate broker. I can speak for the broker part of it. You do want somebody who's an expert, and that can mean a lot of different things for you. It can be an expert in your home type. It can be an expert in your neighborhood. It can be an expert in your particular situation and what the needs are. But whomever you find, they should understand what is happening in the market right now. They should know how to navigate those market shifts. They should be able to give you a clear plan for how they are planning to market your home, and set some real expectations for both timeline and what to expect if someone does come with a contingent offer, as Rashidah was explaining, so that you have a chance to sort of go through your different scenarios. If somebody needs to sell something before they buy this place, is that something that you'd be willing to wait for in order to achieve a higher sale price? Those are kinds of things that it's helpful to have kind of game out in advance with your broker so that you are ready for those offers when they come in. So definitely speak to people that you know have had good experiences. If you're in a building where there's a broker who's a real specialist in the building, sometimes that can be exactly the right person that you want to have sell. Occasionally, the person who's a specialist in the building may be have just done so many deals that they're a little bit blind to the special value that your home has. So if they're not suggesting that you can get for it what you think you should, definitely speak to other brokers too. But we have a list. Oh, we're going to send that to you too, of questions to ask a real estate agent when you're interviewing them to become your listing broker. And what kind of questions would you ask an attorney, Rashidah?
So attorney for as a seller is also very important. At minimum, you should have the reason you have a real estate attorney specifically is that the buyer's down payment has to be held in a specific type of escrow account because that money is held by the attorney until the closing. So at minimum, it should be an attorney, a real estate attorney. You want to find out how long they've been practicing. Do they have an escrow account? Do they practice real estate? Are you going to be working with that attorney? Or do they have support staff that you're going to be working with? Also, because the closes are done in person, you want to make sure that your attorney is going to be available. If an attorney does primary litigation and real estate, they really don't focus on. If they have to go to court or they have a trial coming on, your transaction may not be a priority because that's not where they really practice it. So you want to also find out what areas do they really practice. And then even things like put it together the contract of sale and finding out what terms are standard, what terms are negotiable. You want to make sure that your attorney knows these things. And if it is a situation where you are buying and selling, you want to make sure that an attorney, whether they have done that, how many transactions have they done, how long have they been practicing, are they familiar with co-ops, do they just represent buyers that sell houses, or do they represent buyers that sell co-ops and condos as well? So always have that conversation with the attorney, and also the type of communication. Are they communicating with you? How long do they take to respond to your questions? Because things do move pretty quickly. You want to be respectful of time, but you also want to make sure that you're getting into contract and you're getting things done so that your deal doesn't fall through.
Yeah, I think that question about how do you communicate is a really important one and easy to overlook. So if you're a person whose communication style is you want to be able to be texting somebody all the time, like make sure you're working with a real estate agent who is somebody who feels comfortable responding in that way. You may find a real estate agent who has a large team, for example. There's lots of brokers who work and they may have 9 people on their team, and you don't know who is showing it from day to day. But you really like the idea that there's an entire team behind you, even if they're juggling a lot of listings. Or you may want somebody who's giving more hands-on and personal attention to the property. It all really comes down to your taste. There's a broker for everybody, the same way there's a house for everybody. And making sure you're working with somebody who doesn't make you feel like you're miscommunicating all the time, I think is really key. You can find somebody who will work with you the way you need to going to be able to give you what you need. I have a great client right now who says, just give me all the data. I want to see all the data all the time. And I do. I just pile the data onto him. And I love that. But then I have other brokers who would have, or other clients who would have no idea what to do with that. And I would just be gumming up their email. And so I save that for the people who really dig it. All right. So, and the other thing I think to understand about real estate agents is that we're all members of the same multiple list service for the most part. So we're members of REBNY, the Real Estate Board of New York, and that means that when you list with us, even though we're a really small independent company, your property gets the same exposure that it would if you were working with a big, multinational company that has shareholders and offices in Omaha. So because of the way the multiple list service works here, any broker who's a member of REBNY is going to be able to get you the kind of attention for your property. Oh, it's a thing that happens at Rashidah's office. They are saving energy by having motion detectors on their lights. It's like, oh, right, your office manager is gone for the day. So then the other things that we really want to do for our clients is we want to tell a consistent story, and Rashidah will chime in on this too. So if you have a property that is problematic in some way, let's say you have a property that does not have a certificate of occupancy, not necessarily a problem, but can be a problem in certain ways. These are things that we want to know in the beginning and things that we want to be transparent about, to the extent that it's necessary as we put together both the pricing and the marketing for the home. So if you have an absolutely gorgeous, recently renovated turnkey property that everybody is looking for, that's great. We can shoot for the moon. We're going to have beautiful photographs. We're going to have great floor plans. We're going to market it in a way that is consistent with that. But if you have a place that is maybe needs a little more work, you want to be telling that story. You want to be telling it with your price. You want to be telling it with your photos. You want to be telling it with the text that you use in the language, in your listing language. So when we are selling something that's maybe a bit more of a fixer-upper, we have different language from what we do with something that's really turnkey, and that is the best way for us to find the right buyers for you. And I can sell any of those stories, right? Like I feel like I'm a person who's like an animal rescue person. Like I've never met a property I couldn't love. And I just love buildings. I love the possibility in them. And so you want a broker who can sell the true story of your home. And what we do is we also try to make it the best version of itself it possibly can be. We don't try to pretend it's something it's not. We don't do virtual renovations and virtual staging because that's very confusing to buyers. So we do real staging with our own staging materials, and we'll clean up and do everything that we can, little piece of, if there's a leak in your ceiling 4 years ago and you fixed the roof, but you never got somebody in to clean up the and repaint the ceiling, we're going to do that for you. Like we're going to get it done so that there's no obvious issues with your building that make people ask questions. If the problem has been addressed, we don't want any evidence of the problem still showing and making people feel nervous. So that's really how we approach it. We try to be very transparent. We try to be very kind. We try to be very accommodating, and we try to be really realistic. And then one of the ways that we do that is that we go through your property with a fine-tooth comb with your attorney.
Yeah, so definitely as you start, thinking about buyers and stuff, you want to start figuring out, if you did renovations to the property, did your contractors get all of the sign-offs that they needed? There was a point when the market went, buyers were purchasing property and taking it with violations, and they said they'll take care of it after they close. And then now it's like 5 to 10 years and you forgot to take care of that. So these things that you want to make sure that all are taken care of. So now that you're about to sell the property, you have those things under control, because the buyer is going to do a title search and you don't want them to have an issue after you get into contract. So always, attorney can probably look up the property and say, hey, this is a certificate of occupancy, or there's a violation, or there's there's open permit. I had a client recently. He was putting the property on the market, and when I got the deal sheet, I always look up the property, and the deal sheet had it as a two family. And when I look up the certificate of occupancy, it says one family. And I, call the client and I call the agent and I'm like, this says it's a one family. Oh, but the property, it's a two family. I'm like, but the certificate of occupancy says one family. The next door neighbor has this. And then you see, and he's like, I refinanced and all of these things. But it's, it was a one family. So they lost that first buyer and they had to now go and try to, figure out pricing wise. But this could have been something that was avoided when in the beginning, when you speak with your agent, or even if the agent had called an attorney or looked up the property to just see what the actual certificate of occupancy is. And as a seller, you may not know to look up where to look and if your paperwork has been so many years. So it's something that you can always speak with your attorney to see if they can look up and see things like that to make sure that there's no issues. And then if that has, then you can negotiate with your buyers on, solar panels. Those are becoming a new thing. There's a solar panel on the property, so you're taking it with that contract that it's a loan that you take out and they have to pay off that loan for the next couple of years. So always, as Tina has said, there's a buyer. It's just a matter of, figuring out what kind of things are on the property and hopefully getting those addressed first.
Right. And if we do all of that in advance, we should be able to price your property accurately to be able to attract offers. Right. So that's the whole plan, is we want to get the offers in. And so we may say, oh, but the apartment upstairs sold for $1.2 million in 2022. So I want 125 for my place because 2 more years have passed. Well, 2022 was a really different market, and it was less expensive for people to carry a mortgage then. And so there's a lot of different factors where you may feel like, of course, it must be worth this, but we want to market it so that we're actually pricing it for right now when you're selling. And if now's not the right time for you to sell and you can wait, then maybe waiting is the right choice for you too. Like, we are never here to push you into selling if selling is not the right option for you. And we definitely don't want to push people into selling if it's going to put them in a financial bind to do so. So hanging on to your property, if that's the right thing, we're happy to be talked out of a job if that's the right thing for our clients. So, but let's say we have marketed it properly. We didn't have to do a lot of price adjustments because we priced in an open violation that we knew we were going to have somebody else clear for us. And we've done our first open house and people are coming in and we get an offer right away. So one of the things that we always recommend that people do is take that first offer seriously. Sometimes you get an offer and it's at your asking price after your first showing and you think, oh, we underpriced it. That is not the case. If you get an offer at your asking price at your first showing, you've priced it accurately. And if you've underpriced it, you're going to get multiple offers that are at and above the asking price. But take that first offer really seriously. The buyer who makes a first offer is somebody who's been in the market, has probably been outbid on something else, is really serious about your home, and you might not get another one. There's not a guarantee you're getting another offer that's as good as this one. So take that first offer, and really all offers, seriously as they come in. If the offer is not where you want it to be, if the offer is insultingly low, and you're just mad and you don't want those people who came in with that mean low offer to get your home, we always want you to counter it. Sometimes people just want to see how low they could get it for. And the person who comes in with a lowball offer could end up coming up to being your highest offer. Don't let this sort of perceived insult of a lowball offer keep you from countering and hanging on to that potential buyer. Everybody's got their own way of doing things. You're not going to be moving in with the buyer if their process isn't like what you will like to do. Don't worry. They're going to live in your house and you're going to live in your future house. So don't let somebody's kind of style turn you off if they're actually going to be the best buyers for the home. Wait, so what else? What am I there? Oh, there's a lot of other things. So as those offers come in, we want you to be prepared to offer concessions, credits, price adjustments, depending on what people find as they do their inspection, or if if the market is driving the price down in some way. So what we're seeing right now is that tight inventory, prices are remaining high, but there is more flexibility. And as Rashidah just said, there's more willingness to accept concessions, or to provide concessions for the buyers who are coming. So you may say, get one offer. It's a really good offer, but as Rashidah was pointing out, it's contingent on the closed sale of their home. So it's somebody who has something that they hopefully already have in contract to sell, and they will not be able to complete the purchase of your home until they receive the proceeds from the sale of their own. In a hot market, people just turn those offers away. That might be the best offer for you. So we're not turning anybody away in this market. We're trying to shape every offer into being in as good shape as it possibly can be. And so that you can move forward quickly and get contracts signed without delay, because the big deal killer is time. And I may find you the great people, get you the great offer, but if you're not ready to go at that point, time could kill your deal. So Rashidah, what are some of the things that slow us down when we are reviewing the contracts?
So if you're selling a co-op or a condo, you 100% want to have your documents for your building already in the hands of your agent. Because once that offer is accepted, they send out the deal sheet and they can send out those co-op or condo documents. Those documents may be the offering plan, which is something that you got originally when you bought the property. It may have been a hard copy. Now, a lot of times it's, electronic form. But if it's a hard copy, you may need to get that to your agent in advance so they can scan it and have it, able so that they can email it. You want to get the last 2 years financials for your co-op or your condominium. And that you may have to get from your management company if they haven't given that to you already. If you have house rules, anything that you can give as far as the documents for the building, you want to have that in advance so that your agent can get that out to the other side as quickly as possible so that they can do their due diligence and get you into contract. Um, there are other things such as documents that you need to get if you're selling your house. Not so important if you don't have a copy of your deed, but you can give your attorney the address so they can confirm the ownership on the deed. We've had situations where I'll tell you that same situation where with the two family that turned out to be a one family. I got the deal sheet and it only had one person as the seller. When I looked up the deed, it was two people on the deed. So I called the client and I said, wait, there's another person on the deed. He was like, oh yeah, that was my mother. She was on it when I bought it just as extra person. She's gonna have to sign the contract and also be, should be listed as a seller because she's owner of the property. So those things you wanna speak with your agent, speak with your attorney. If you don't have a copy of the deed, get a copy of your deed pulled online, which your attorney can do. If you have a mortgage on the property, if you don't have a mortgage and you're selling your co-op, do you have your stock certificate and your proprietary lease? Because these are all things that you want to have handy. Your latest maintenance statement, so you know where your current maintenance is. If it's just been recently increased, you want to know that. So that's going on the deal sheet as well, or eventually the contract of sale, because these are things that the other side, when they're looking at the contract or doing their due diligence, are going to want to know. And you don't want to delay the signing of the contract because there's misinformation or information that they thought was incorrect.
And the other thing to be prepared for during this time period between accepted offer and signed contract is that if your buyer has requested an inspection, so in some other markets, they will do the inspection after the contract is signed. That is not the practice in New York. Your attorney is going to want that inspection done before they issue or before they sign the contract. So let's say we've gone through everything, we've been really careful, but then the inspector comes and finds something that we hadn't noticed. So it's summertime, you've been running your air conditioning, but then they test your boiler and your heat isn't working because something happened. those are things that we need to know in advance, and then we can accommodate those in the contract. So there's a few different ways that you can address that. You can either say, we are going to have this fixed prior to the closing. You can say, we are going to give you a credit at closing to cover some of the cost of the all of the costs, some of the costs. Sometimes they want the cost plus for this replacement, or sometimes they will agree to a reduction in the purchase price to accommodate that repair. So these are things that can come up. Again, we don't want it to slow down the process, because you don't want your buyers to get buyer's remorse. We don't want them to go through another whole weekend and go see another house that they like more. So we like to keep that process going as quickly as we possibly can, so that you can get into your signed contract as quickly as possible. And I think one of the things that Rashidah and I were both noting is that buyers don't seem to have any urgency right now around getting a contract signed. Like, they will just sit. And that's unusual. It's usually the buyers who are really like, let's get this signed, because they don't want to have the home get scooped up by somebody else. So during this period of time, after you've accepted an offer, we recommend, and our practice is that we as agents, we will continue to show the home. Even if we have backup buyers, we will continue to sell the home. We will continue talking to our backup buyers to make sure that there's somebody who's still on the hook. And let's say you do the inspection and somebody says, oh, I don't want to fix the boiler, and they walk away. It's good to have other buyers who are in the pipeline for you, so that we've got somebody who we can jump to and say, hey, you know what? First buyer fell through, you're next up. And we know that this thing happened with the boiler, so we're willing to take your lower offer. And so there's a lot of things. You just want to make sure that you can keep the process moving quickly once you get to that process. Okay, so I think we can skip the next slide and go. We hit those, right? We hit them. We're in contract. So we managed to keep everybody on track. Buyers and sellers, or the buyers have signed the contract, and then what do they do with their money?
So your seller's attorney, that's also why it's important that you have a real estate attorney, because the buyer's down payment is held in escrow. Most down payments are now given via wire to your attorney's escrow account, or they may bring a bank check payable to the attorney as escrow agent. And your attorney holds that in escrow until the closing of title. So you are in contract, they've signed it, the attorney has the down payment. The next step is for the buyers to get their mortgage. As a seller, you really don't have a lot to do at this point. Is kind of waiting for the buyer to get their mortgage, get the buyer's attorney to get the title report search done. And this also, on the background, your attorney is the one that's going to be reviewing the title report to make sure that there's anything that has to be cleared up in time for the closing that is taken care of. So this also is a point where some of those documents that I told you that you may need to have, such as your mortgage statement, copy of your stock certificate and lease, if you had an old a title insurance policy when you purchased the property, because if anything comes up, we can look at those documents and say, hey, this is what happened when they purchased it. So it's cleared, or they refinanced the property and the mortgage was paid off. Here's a copy of the payoff statement. So let's get in contact with the bank so we can get that satisfaction recorded in time for the closing. So I tell clients, don't throw away things as you start getting your property ready for, to sell. Scan it maybe, and scan it or put it to the side. If you have paperwork, you do want to declutter, but you also want to not throw out important documents. So always err on the side of scanning all of your documents or setting it aside in case something comes up and you have to dig through to see if you have a copy of your old survey, or if you have a copy of your title insurance policy, or a payoff letter or something like that, because this is happening while you're in contract, is clearing those title things that may come up. The buyer's attorney is also working with, well, the agents are working, if you're selling a co-op or a condo, for them to get the applications into the co-op board and the condo association so that they can get the approvals or the waiver so you can get to the closing.
Yeah, I think this is something where if you're in a building where you have a management company, or a board or both, that you should be prepared to be in contact with them during this process because there is an appraisal, there are questionnaires, there are a lot of things that we're finding. When we say there's not a lot of urgency, that's also been true for the management companies. So we're seeing banks really wait for information to come back to them. And so if you have a good relationship with your management company, sometimes they really want to hear from the shareholders or the owners. They don't necessarily want to hear from me, nudging them all the time. If you don't have a great relationship with them, they'll want to hear from Farah in my office because Farah is the management whisperer and she'll get them to do anything. So, but we don't want to find out 2 weeks before we're supposed to close that the reason we don't have a commitment letter from the bank is because they're still waiting on a questionnaire from the condominium. So we definitely need to stay on top of that stuff as you go. But you're right. At this point, you should also be figuring out what you're going to do with your furniture and getting ready for your move. Because what would you say once we've got the contract signed is about the timeline? We said that the on or about date is usually about 60 days.
60 days if you're looking at a condo or a house for your closing. And if you're looking at a co-op, around 90 days, sometimes more depending on your co-op building.
Yeah.
So definitely this is the time where a lot of it said the buyer is doing a lot of the work, but you need to start preparing yourself on, they got their mortgage commitment. Now it's a firm contract because you still have contingencies in your contract. If the buyer's not able to get a mortgage, they do have a right to cancel the contract and get the return of the deposit. So hopefully the buyer has been vetted, they've been pre-approved, so you have a really strong buyer. When you're looking at a condo or a house, co-ops, unfortunately, they make that decision. And you can probably think you have the best buyer and the best terms, and unfortunately, the building sometimes rejects them. I haven't seen that happen in a lot, but it does happen. So it's a little extra kind of frustration or anxiety if you're selling your co-op to have that third party kind of come in to make a decision. But if you're looking at a house or a condo, typically if you're a buyer, there's, the title stuff, we've had all of the kind of like done your due diligence in advance. So there's no violations, there's no open permits. You have a copy of your deed. So all of that's kind of your mortgage. We have a copy of your mortgage so we can order your payoff. It's kind of just pushing the paperwork along for the buyer to get their mortgage and then getting you to the closing.
Yeah.
And the same thing similar for a condominium.
Yeah, no, one more thing that I was saying, I'm backing up the timeline a little bit, but that is that for your appraisal, we also recommend that if I mean, you're ready to start moving and decluttering and packing all your stuff into boxes. Ideally, you can wait until after the appraisal has taken place before you start sort of taking everything off the walls and putting it into boxes, because we do want your home to appraise for the highest possible number, and often keeping it in its sort of staged and finished position is one of the ways that if we need to squeeze a little bit of extra value out, keeping it looking like it did when you listed it and showed it is one way to ensure a higher appraisal. But that said, if you have to start moving, we'll figure out a way around it. All right, so now we're moving into your actual closing of the deal. So as Rashidah mentioned, there is a final walkthrough prior to the actual closing, and that'll happen within 48 hours of the closing. So we can't schedule the final walkthrough until we schedule the actual closing itself, which Rashidah has to do.
Yes, I normally say it's like a juggling act. That's when I'm like calling, depending on the type of property, there's probably maybe seven people at that closing table. You have your co-op, you have the bank attorney, the payoff attorney, the seller's attorney, the buyer, the buyer's attorney. All have to be available on the same day, on the same time in order to have that closing. If it's a house or a condo, you have your title company, you have the bank, you have the both sides as well. So scheduling all of those people to be available on that same day and same time because the closings are done in person. If as a seller, you don't necessarily have to be at the closing. Most people do want to be at the closing and kind of hand over the keys. But if there's a situation where you've moved out of the state already, or you absolutely cannot be at the closing, you can give your attorney what we call as power of attorney to sign the documents for you on your behalf. And it does have to get approved by the co-op if it's a co-op that you're selling. If it's a condo or a house, the title company has to review it and sign it. So you do want to have that discussion with your attorney in advance, whether you're going to be available to attend the closing in person, or whether you need to give them a power of attorney in order for them to close on your behalf. Um, and yeah, so that's something. But the closings, once that's scheduled, the attorney will send out an email to all of the parties. This is when the close is going to happen. Schedule your final walk, have the buyer schedule the final walkthrough with your agent. You want to make sure that everything is still working order, that plumbing, heating, electrical systems, appliances, because this is the buyer's last opportunity. And now everything's out to make sure that they're getting what they're in contract for. So I said that walkthrough is very important, and you want to make sure that your property is prepared for that walkthrough. And your agent will be there in order to go to attend the walkthrough with the other side. If something comes up, that's why you try to do your walkthrough at least 48 hours before, because then they can figure out, hey, we need to, something's broken. Let's get an estimate, or let's get this fixed in time for the actual closing. There's time enough to adjust if something does come up in the walkthrough.
Right. Let's say you move that gigantic credenza that's been there since you inherited the house from your mother, and there's a hole in the wall behind it that nobody has seen. That's something that we want to know about and address, and we can either repair it, or if it's less than the size of a dime, we don't have to do anything. But if it is, you know, like a big hole to the that goes through to the living room, that's something that we want to make sure that we can either repair or get a credit agreed upon by the attorneys prior to showing up at the closing table. So it's usually everything goes fine, but there's often something, there's an outlet that isn't working for some way, for some reason, some little things. Oftentimes the buyers will just overlook those, but we will make a note of them, make sure everybody's in agreement about how to proceed. And then when you get to the closing, you don't have to worry about those things slowing you down. And I mean, that's really about it. Once we've done the walkthrough, you either have the closing happens when you're not there, if you've done power of attorney, or you show up for the closing
And
yourself.
yeah, and you get that big check that you've been waiting on. You've paid off all of those closing costs that you knew about in advance because you've had that discussion multiple times with your attorney. And now it's just a matter of getting those turning over the keys and getting your check and go continuing on with your next chapter. Um, but the closes are typically about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending. And for the most part, you're as a seller, you're not signing a lot of documents. It's mainly the buyer that's signing the majority of the documents. So that's also why sometimes sellers are like, give their attorney power of attorney, because the seller's part is really maybe 20 minutes of signing documents and watching the other side sign the rest of the documents and waiting for your check to be so that you can turn over the keys.
Right, and sitting there, but getting increasingly nervous as the person keeps popping their head in and saying, "We don't have the money yet. The bank hasn't sent it yet." And then they go away, and then they come back, and then eventually they do send the money, and then you get your check. So, yeah, some people want to skip that, which I understand. But I think for us, a lot of times it's it's an emotional journey to transfer your home to somebody else, and in most cases, this is the first time you're meeting the people who are buying it, and for a lot of people, they really do value that closure. So, so we're not going to be, if you want to be there, it's always nice. But if not, the Rashidah can send the check to you. You can just pick it
Yes.
up from her office.
Yes.
And hopefully, as you go through this process, you have had a really good relationship with your attorney. You've had a good relationship with your broker. The process has been as low stress as possible, as low stress as it possibly can be, and that you exit this process feeling enriched and lightened of your burdens, and excited to move on to the next stage of your life. So that's about it. So thank you for joining us. We're going to, we've got resources that we're going to be emailing you. We've got some video tips and tricks on YouTube, but we have a seller's handbook. And then if you're interested, we'll also give you links so you can schedule a call with us, either with Rashidah or myself. And we also have great resources on our website. We have our blog, and we do have old classes. If you want to see what the market was like in a couple of years ago, you can watch our archive videos on YouTube. So I think, oh, look, we did it right at 6 o'clock, which leaves us with time if anybody wants to add questions to the chat. We have a little bit of extra time to go through and answer some questions that you might want to have here on the webinar. But if not, actually, I have a question for you, Rashidah.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I are working on a deal right now where there is the sellers, we're not working for the sellers, we're working for the buyer, but the sellers are buying something. They haven't found the place they want to buy yet. And they asked for quite a lengthy contract period. And we did a certain amount of back and forth on that to try to get, because our clients are moving, are returning to the city from out of town. And and I just wanted to check in because I kind of did what I could with it. But at the end of the day, the sellers were just so anxious
Mm-hmm.
about finding themselves homeless that they really pushed us to a very long contract period.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's the thing. It's as a, I mean, as a seller,
Yeah,
they're able to get that long time period because they found a buyer that's willing to wait and didn't have to move in immediately. So the contract it still had that on or about. So it wasn't an on or about 60 days. I think we gave a specific number of months. So it was an on or about from that date. Um, and now, as the buyer side, we're waiting on the seller to find a property. Now, once we get to that on or about, the seller has used up the on or about time period, we can send what we call a time of essence notice. It's normally kind of like the last resort. But obviously, you don't want to be in contract indefinitely because, especially if the buyer's getting a mortgage and they've been cooperative, you want to make sure that they're also protected. So as the seller also has to understand that, and the seller may have to rent something or move out and find something temporary, or the seller may risk losing that transaction or risk having to pay the buyer's cost to extend their rate or give them additional funds so that they can stay in contract longer once we get to the point if we have to send out a time of essence notice. So as a seller, have a plan A, have a plan B, and sometimes even you may need to have a plan C if you if you're able to get a long closing date and you still can't find something and maybe having to go someplace temporary.
right. Right. I think, and in this particular case too, if they find something sooner, the seller is going to be able to accelerate the process
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we basically agreed to everything because our buyers really wanted this home, and it's a really great apartment. And the sellers, because they had leverage, were able to extract from us this long time frame that isn't really terrible for if it was a terrible thing for our buyers, we would have moved on and tried to find something else, but they're able to accommodate it. Oh, and then another thing happened with this that we didn't talk about, which is inclusions and exclusions. So when you're selling your home, everything that is attached to the wall, including curtain rods, built-in bookshelves, cabinetry, those convey with the property unless otherwise excluded. That also goes for appliances. So
Yes.
your refrigerator, your dishwasher, built-in appliances. You can take your countertop microwave with you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a built-in microwave, that's going to convey with the home. And then any sort of your precious family chandelier that you inherited from your grandmother and is hanging it above your dining table, unless you plan to just let the new owners have your precious chandelier, you need to explicitly exclude it in your contract.
Mm-hmm. And even when you exclude them, you also have to understand you may have to replace them with the standard builder's grade. So you're not just leaving it empty with wires coming out of the wall. So anything that you're taking that's a fixture, you will have to replace it because it still is part of the property. But have that conversation when you're putting the property on the market. If there's two refrigerators and, things like that, are you taking one and you're leaving? Are you taking your washer dryer that you love, or you're leaving it? So those are things you want to have in the contract, what you're excluding, what's included, and making sure that when they do that final walkthrough, the things that they thought were included are actually included, and the things that were excluded have been taken and replaced with something that has been required.
Likewise, don't assume that something that you think is awesome and you're just going to leave behind as a gift to the new owners is something that they're going to appreciate. So let's say you have a bit like a beautiful Weber grill that you just bought, but you can't take it with you. You're moving to a co-op on the Upper East Side and you leave the grill behind as a gift. You may be required to remove that from the premises if they do not want that gift. So those are things that we really need to know in advance. And so if there are inclusions, so things that you're going to leave behind that you don't want to be responsible for moving, those are things that we should know about in advance too. And again, it's really easy to have this conversation at the beginning. It's much harder to have this conversation at the final walkthrough.
Mhm. Okay.
All right. That's it for my addenda for the day.
I think we
It's
are
nice to
good.
see
It's
you.
good to see you. Thank you for, another great webinar, and hopefully our, participants here had got some great information as you think about putting your property on the market. Even if it's just starting to gather documents and putting it aside, and just kind of thinking on what you want to do in the future.
Yeah, if
Okay.
you're really early in the process, we'd love to have that conversation with you now. You don't feel like you have to get your ducks in a row before you start interviewing people.
Well, have a great evening.
Thanks. So nice to see you. Thanks everybody for coming.
Okay,
All
bye.
right.
Have a good one.
Bye.